Hey everyone, it is Ricky. It is week 4 of the stay-at-home ordinance. I'll bet that most of you are going a little bit stir crazy, as am I. As you can probably hear, the rain is really coming down outside. I was trying to angle it so you could see it, but because of the backlighting, it didn't really work. But it looks really dark outside. Like, it actually is only early afternoon here, but it looks like it's probably 7 p.m. or sunset. And I have to admit, I really do love the rain, but it does feel a bit more somber and maybe even a little bit ominous in the middle of a worldwide pandemic when you're stuck inside. But I was also thinking that I think a lot of us have kind of come to associate the week leading up to Jesus' death, which is also called Holy Week, with kind of just a sense of melancholy. This past Sunday, if you tuned in, which hopefully you did, we celebrated Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem, also known as Palm Sunday, where the people welcomed him, Jesus, as the Messiah or the Savior as he rode into Jerusalem on the donkey, and they had palm fronds, which they laid down for him. Yet, we know that just days later, all of those people will turn on him and send him to die a very lonely and painful death, right? So after Sunday, we're just kind of left to go about our week anticipating this horrific death on the cross that we know is going to come on Friday, otherwise known as Good Friday. And it's really almost as if we just kind of like hold our breaths until Sunday when we can just sigh, relief, and just kind of flip a switch and celebrate the resurrection. And for some of you, celebrate the end of the Lent season. So you eat those chocolate Easter eggs. But I think if we really rush over the days that lead up to Jesus' death and resurrection, that we truly miss out on some of Jesus' most comforting teachings. Sometimes challenging too. So I want to give us a quick overview of Holy Week. So I have this nice picture in my Bible, if you can see it, of the different days chronologically of Holy Week. So I just kind of wanted to quickly talk about it with you because I think it's good background to know. So the weekend that was actually leading up to Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, or Palm Sunday, Jesus decides to stay in the town of Bethany, and he stays there with his friends. So he's there with Mary and Martha and Lazarus. You might recognize Mary as the woman who anoints Jesus' feet with that expensive perfume as just kind of that act of humility and devotion before Jesus goes into Jerusalem. And then, of course, we know that on Sunday is that day of triumphal entry, where Jesus rides into Jerusalem, which is fulfilling that ancient prophecy from Zechariah 9:9. And the crowd really welcomes him with words from Psalms chapter 118, actually. So they're really giving him that messianic or kingly title, that sort of king of Israel that they're hoping for. And then on Monday, something we don't often realize is that is the day that Jesus actually goes in and sort of cleanses the temple. We've often heard that phrase, which I don't know about you, but I didn't always know that that came during Holy Week. So right after his entry is when Jesus is in Jerusalem. He finds the court of the Gentiles, which is just full of like money changers making this huge profit. And so he drives them out and overturns the benches and the tables, right? So Jesus, in a sense, is not wasting time. You know, he's in his last week. He knows that. And so I think it's really cool to look deeply at what he does during this week and what he seems to value for really his last days on earth. So then we have Tuesday, which, if we're celebrating it day by day, would be today. So some people call that the day of controversy and parables. So we can look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and also a little bit from John. But kind of part A of Tuesday, Jesus is in Jerusalem still, and he's kind of evading the traps that the priests have kind of set up to try to trick him. But then the second part of the day, Jesus steps back. He goes up to what was called the Mount of Olives, which just overlooks all of Jerusalem. It's described as being really beautiful. And so that whole Tuesday afternoon, Jesus sits up on the Mount of Olives. He teaches with all these parables. So a lot of the parables that we were doing in our Refuge series were actually given at this exact moment during Holy Week, which is really cool. He also spends time just kind of warning the people again against hypocrisy and against the Pharisees. And then he kind of makes some predictions about future events, including his own return. So there's a lot that really happens there. A lot of famous passages like the washing of the feet, and Jesus talks about his greatest commandment. And then Wednesday, we kind of see this pause. We don't really have much information on Wednesday in the Gospels, but we can kind of assume that Jesus takes this possibly as a day of rest, kind of, and recuperation. And then Thursday, we see him come together with his disciples for that Passover, that Last Supper. People also call that Maundy or Holy Thursday. So Jesus in his upper room, he prepares that meal for himself and his disciples, and he really gives it new meaning, right? So now the bread is his body and the blood is the wine, and so that's where we get that term, the Lord's Supper. And then after singing a hymn, they go to the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus prays. He's really in agony. He knows what lies ahead for him. And then, of course, Friday we have the crucifixion. Saturday is the down day, right? Jesus is in the tomb, which is interesting to note that it's a Sabbath day. And then Sunday we finally have the resurrection, which most of us also call Resurrection Sunday. So I know that was a lot of information, but what I want us to really dive a little bit deeper into today is the way that Jesus seems to comfort and challenge his disciples during the days leading up to his death and resurrection. So specifically, I'm going to pull some passages from John. If you happen to be following along, I'll stick closer to John like 13, 15, 16, and 17. But don't worry, I'm not going to read the full passages, just little clips. So I guess first I should say that I just really love John's gospel. It feels really raw to me, and we just get this unique sort of glimpse into the personhood of Jesus that makes him so relatable. So that's why I'm pulling these passages from John, and also a lot of them are only in John. So the first one I wanted to look at is from John 13, 33 to 35. And I have it on here, so I'll read it here. He says, "My children, I will be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and just as I told the Jews, so I tell you now. Where I am going, you cannot come. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." So what I love about this verse is that Jesus is addressing us as his children. So he's really addressing us with the authority of a parent, but also with that deep kindness, right? He really knows best, and he can see this bigger picture when we can't. So I want you to think about a time that your parent dropped you off, like the first day of kindergarten. If you're like me, you probably cried for hours and tried to cling to your mom's leg. Jesus knows that, like little kids, we want to follow him where he's going, right? But he warns that we can't just yet. There's more to the story that we have to experience first. So next in the verse, Jesus commands us to love one another like he loves us, which we hear so much that it just kind of becomes like, yeah, okay, love one another. But this is this huge overarching theme in all of the New Testament, that we are free from our mess ups and are striving to earn our own goodness. You know, Paul tells us by grace we are saved. And Jesus also says that everyone will recognize us and his followers if we show that love. So he doesn't say to love others who think like us. He says to love everyone always, right? I think Bob Goff says that, like everyone always. That is really what gives our life story this purpose that we're constantly seeking. Our purpose as humans is to reflect God's love. So if you're sitting in your house this week and you're stressing about how you can cultivate your identity or be successful or well-liked, rest in the fact that our call is to love, to have grace for ourselves and for one another, because God has given us that grace as a gift. So this is one theme that we see in this week leading up to Jesus' death that he really finds important to stress. So moving to John 15, we get this little passage about Jesus as the true vine. So verses 4 through 5, he says, "Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches." So before his physical body leaves the earth, Jesus is giving us this beautiful picture of what it looks like to stay connected to him. So the metaphor, right, is that a branch cannot bear fruit. In other words, it can't display goodness or have purpose without being rooted to that vine. So it seems to me that Jesus is really giving us this little secret to how to live our earthly lives with this heavenly perspective. And that's really just that we must remain rooted and grounded in love. So this means that we are fully reliant on our Savior. We are recognizing his hand in our existence. We're still connected to our humanity and our purpose on this earth, but we're also hopeful for an eternity that's in his presence. So if we are rooted and grounded in love, then that's when we truly start to bear fruit. Jesus goes on in verses 13 to 17 to call us his friends. He says, "I do not call you servants any longer, because the servant does not know what the master is doing. But I have called you friends, because I have made known to you everything that I have heard from my Father. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you to go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask him in my name. I am giving you these commands so that you may love one another." And that's John 15:13 through 17. So, in other words, Jesus isn't purposefully withholding information from us. It's like that old movie line, like, you can't handle the truth. Jesus knows that we need the truth. He doesn't shy away from telling his disciples what will happen to him during these days that are leading up to his death. He really talks to us like friends. And that means that there's this sense of like camaraderie between us and the Savior of the world, which is pretty amazing if you really think about that. So often we think we're choosing to believe in God, but the irony is he's going like, that's nice, but I already chose all of you. Like, welcome home, in a sense. Now extend some of that radical acceptance to others, right? So John 16 through 24, Jesus reminds us, he says, "You have pain now, but I will see you again, and your hearts will rejoice, and no one will take your joy from you." So when things are feeling somber, remember that we have access to the only lasting source of joy, and the Father desperately wants us to have it. In verse 32, he says, "The hour is coming, indeed it has come, when you will be scattered, each one to his home, and you will leave me alone. Yet I am not alone, because the Father is with me." So if you feel lonely right now in quarantine, think about Jesus during Holy Week. Jesus is saying, like, look, even I had to fight off loneliness. He's almost like a sibling saying, you're never really alone because our Father is with us. So I hope that can encourage you. And then finally in John 17, we get this beautiful picture of Jesus praying for his disciples, which is only in John. And so he's taking this moment away before he goes to the cross to just lift up his disciples then and his followers for ages to come to the Lord. So he says, verses 25 through 26, "Righteous Father, the world does not know you, but I know you, and my disciples know that you have sent me. I made your name known to them, and I will make it known, so that the love with which you have loved may be in them, and I in them." So Jesus is facing the cross, but he's praying for us. His dying wish, literally, is for us to experience the love of God and to be one with him. No other religion gives us this close, personal intimacy with a Creator who sacrificed so much for us so that we could experience life to the full. So let's rest in that hope this week. Hopefully this little message gave you a lot of joy and hopeful anticipation. I just want to close with Psalm 46. It's really short. It says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." All right, yeah. So I love you guys. I hope to see you tonight, April 7th, on Zoom at 7 p.m. Bye.